please subscribe and don't forget to press the bell icon to get notified whenever we upload a new video.
Indira Gandhi was one of the most powerful politicians India ever had and one of the most powerful prime ministers as well. Some of the most important decisions in our history, be it bank nationalization, abolition of privy purses, the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty of 1971 and the liberation of Bangladesh, all these decisions took place during her time. But there was one man, a diplomat turned civil servant, who had a powerful impact on all her decisions. We're talking about P.N. Haksar, somebody who has been referred to as Indira Gandhi's alternate ego by Jairam Ramesh in his book Intertwined Lives. Mr. Jairam Ramesh is joining us. Mr. Ramesh, we'd like to ask you, there's been a lot written about Mr. P.N. Haksar and about the powerful role he played as principal secretary in Indira's PMO. But why a book just on him and his relationship with Indira Gandhi?
Well, in many ways, he is the man who stealed the Iron Lady, and from 1967 to 1973, he was first her secretary and then her principal secretary. And he was really, in many ways, her ideological compass, alter ego. She took the decisions. She was the prime minister. She was the one who appealed to the people. She had the one with the charisma. But behind her was the power of ideas. Behind her was the power of ideology, exemplified by Mr. Haksar.
Right.
Of course, the Haksar-Indira Gandhi relationship goes back to the 30s, when Indira Nehru, Feroz Gandhi and Mr. Haksar, were fellow students in London, strongly left of center, acolytes of Krishna Menon in the India League, and Mr. Haksar would spend his evenings cooking for Feroz Gandhi and Indira Nehru. So they had a personal relationship.
Yeah.
And when Indira Gandhi becomes Prime Minister for the first time in January 1966, from then on, she has her eyes on Mr. Haksar as her aide, chief aide. And remember, she goes to the US, her first foreign visit in March of 1966. And she asks Mr. Haksar, who is then Deputy High Commissioner in London, to join her in her meetings with the Americans, which is very unusual.
Which was unprecedented.
And of course, there's also the fact that Mr. Haksar was the local guardian to her sons in London. So there was a personal bonding.
Yeah. And a relationship of trust in a big way.
She knew that whatever happens, he is not going to betray her. He's going to be loyal to her. He has an ideology. He was an unrepentant Marxist all his life. He was a communist for a brief period. He was secretary of the Communist Party of India in Nagpur in 42-43. He was strongly left of center.
Yeah.
She knew that. And if you see, from 1967 to 1977, Mrs. Gandhi's economic policy and political ideology was indeed left of center. But after 1980, she's more pragmatic. She sees the change in the world. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan takes place. She tries for a rapprochement with Reagan. The Maruti project, the first big foreign investment into India, into the public sector, which revolutionizes the engineering industry. But Mr. Haksar doesn't change. Indira Gandhi changes.
Indira Gandhi changes. But do you think all these decisions that Indira Gandhi took could have happened without P.N. Haksar?
Well,
would Indira Gandhi have been Indira Gandhi as we know her now without this powerful diplomat?
I think they formed a jugalbandi. I think they formed a partnership. He understood her, she understood him. He was, he had been trained by Nehru. Nehru had got him into the Foreign Service in 1947, into the Ministry of External Affairs and then the Foreign Service in 1947-48. He was totally loyal to the Nehruvian idea of India. She knew that. Now, would nationalization of banks have taken place? Would the abolition of princely purses have happened? It's difficult to say, because these were part of the Congress ideology. The Young Turks were asking for nationalization of banks and the abolition of princely privileges and privy purses. But 1971, which is the glory year for India, the glory year for Indira Gandhi, where she reaches Mount Everest, starts in January of 1971 with the hijacking of the Indian Airlines flight, leading up to the 16th of December, when Pakistan surrenders and an independent Bangladesh is formally recognized by the world. I think Mr. Haksar was the Sutradhar. He was the orchestrator. Indira Gandhi was the political leader. She was the one who gave him the backing. By the way, Mr. Haksar would not have been possible without Indira Gandhi, So he was not...
Because she inducted him.
Yeah, she inducted him.
Yeah.
He derived his power from her. He derived his power from his proximity to her, from his understanding with her. So it was a relationship, it was what I would call a synergistic relationship. She strengthened him,
Yeah.
he strengthened her.
Okay.
He had the courage of his convictions,
Right.
which he transferred to Indira Gandhi,
Yeah.
which got immersed in her own convictions,
Right.
and then the magnificence of the achievements that took place.
You know, in 1971, I think we really saw the power and the impact of Mr. Haksar coming to light. He had a role in the Indo-Soviet Friendship Treaty,
Absolutely.
getting arms, ammunition, tanks, defense equipment from the Soviets. Be it
And from Israel.
From Israel,
And
opening
from
a line
Israel,
with Israel for that matter.
Yeah.
Liberation of Bangladesh, he was in constant talks with them as well. So I guess that was the period where we really saw him pulling all strings and playing a very important role.
And very importantly, working with Mr. Kao.
Yeah.
This was the glory year for RNAW, which was set up in 1968 by Mr. Kao and Mr. Haksar. You know, they convinced Indira Gandhi that we must have an external intelligence agency, and RNAW or RAW was set up. And 71 was the glory year for RAW as well. And so don't forget that. I mean, don't forget RAW's role. It was a very important role in 1971. So, you know, Mr. Chandrasekhar Dasgupta, a very distinguished foreign service officer, ambassador to China and so on, he has called this the grand design. You know, there was a grand design. You know, there was a diplomatic design, there was a political design, there was Manekshaw's military design. You know, all this came together, and the man who was orchestrating this on behalf of Indira Gandhi was Mr. Haksar. Also, don't forget one more point I want to make. That Sikkim gets integrated into India in 1975. But the roots of this go back to 1970, to the discussions that Indira Gandhi and Mr. Haksar had on how to deal with Nepal, how to deal with Sikkim. And there are some fascinating notes that he writes to her way back in 1970. And finally, as you know, it's only in April 1975 that Sikkim is integrated into the Indian Union. So that period, very turbulent period, very tumultuous period. This was the period in which Indira Gandhi was thrown out of the Congress party by Mr. Nijlingappa, and the party bosses, the Congress splits. And it is Mr. Haksar who convinces Indira Gandhi that make this not a battle of personalities, but make this a battle of ideas. Make this a battle of ideology. And that's when the Congress party gets a decided left of center ideology, nationalization of banks, and, you know, a building up of the public sector, and so on and so forth.
So interestingly, as you talk about his political role, he had a key decision-making power, not just in the government, but also what was happening in the Congress. When it came to ticket distribution, he had a very important role. Choosing of ministers, writing of Indira Gandhi's speeches for parliament, and also election rallies.
Well, she depended on him. I mean, that's all I can say. He was not a mere civil servant. He was her confidant. He was her secretary. And he saw his role as not only strengthening, you know, the Prime Minister, but strengthening Indira Gandhi, the Prime Minister, because he strongly believed that the Nehruvian tradition of liberalism, of democracy, you know, of a commitment to secular values was symbolized best by Indira Gandhi. And of course that Indira Gandhi was instinctively drawn to an economic ideology in which the public sector plays a very dominant role.
Do you also feel that some of the most important foreign policy decisions and foreign policy approaches that we see of the Indian government today have to be credited and traced back to P.N. Haksar,
Well,
be it our relationship with the Russians,
Russians,
also
certainly, I
opening
would
a
say.
secret line with the Chinese?
No, so I would say certainly with the Indo-Soviet Treaty, D.P. Dhar was the man in Moscow who played the critical role. But in Delhi, it was T.N. Kaul, P.N. Haksar and Indira Gandhi. You know, in 1987, interestingly, long after, you know, he's retired and you're virtually half blind, you're blind in one eye and half blind in the other, Mr. Rajiv Gandhi as Prime Minister sends Mr. Haksar to China as a special envoy. He spends a week to start the process of reconciliation and normalization of relations, and this then results in the historic trip of Mr. Rajiv Gandhi to Beijing in December 1988, which transforms the bilateral relationship. So from and of course, let's not forget the Simla Agreement of July 1972 and the New Delhi Agreement of 1973 on the prisoners of war, which was basically Mr. Haksar's doing, with, of course, as I said, the complete political backing and support of the Prime Minister at that time.
But there was one man who was irked by what P.N. Haksar was doing and probably did not like the proximity that he enjoyed with Indira Gandhi. We're talking about Sanjay Gandhi. They had a very, very difficult, complicated relationship, and they were completely at odds with each other, and that came out to the fore. Mr. Ramesh, we are going to talk about this. We're going to take a short break here on CNBC TV 18, but we will talk about Sanjay Gandhi's role during that period and also the period of emergency, something that P.N. Haksar was against. Welcome back to this special interview with Jairam Ramesh, who's authored a book on the close relationship between P.N. Haksar and Indira Gandhi in his book, Intertwined Lives. Mr. Ramesh, a question about Sanjay Gandhi. He was somebody, from his days in London, he was always upset with P.N. Haksar because he felt that he was not reciprocating, he was not approachable as far as ideas were concerned, be it about Maruti, be it about leaving Rolls-Royce, be it about leaving his studies midway.
Well, I think the roots of the estrangement go back to 1965 and Sanjay Gandhi's tenure at the Rolls-Royce Technical College, which he didn't complete the course which was supposed to by both Indira Gandhi and Mr. Haksar, who wanted him to complete the course. And perhaps Sanjay Gandhi must have felt that Mr. Haksar was being too overbearing and too domineering over him. But from 65 onwards, there is this tension in that relationship, a tension that is singularly absent in Mr. Haksar's relationship with Mr. Rajiv Gandhi, which was very normal, very cordial and very close. In 1968, the Maruti project gets unveiled, and I think that really is the icing on the cake.
Haksar was against
Mr. Haksar was against the Maruti project of Sanjay Gandhi on two grounds. First, he felt that India does not require passenger cars at that point of time.
We need public
We
transport.
need public transport, and we should manufacture scooters on a large scale and flood the country with scooters, two-wheelers. That's one. And then the second point was more personal. He said that the Prime Minister's son should not be staying in the Prime Minister's house and carrying on a business. A business of which he would be the sole beneficiary, because as you know, Maruti, nobody else got the license, only only Sanjay Gandhi got the license. So I think this, the rift with Sanjay Gandhi created the drift with Indira Gandhi, and I think that's when they started moving apart. Of course, don't forget that March 1971, Indira Gandhi gets a spectacular victory, in the midterm polls, which strengthens her immeasurably. It gives her a huge self-confidence. And then we have 1971 December when she is hailed as Durga by Atal Bihari Vajpayee. So she has actually outgrown Mr. Haksar by the end of 1971, but she keeps him on all of 72, and he finally tells her that he wants to leave
and
in December.
I think she also started finding him overbearing. If you go by your book,
I'm sure that if you go by his written record, he was long-winded, he was verbose, he was brutal in his assessment of people, including the Prime Minister and the Prime Minister's son.
But Sanjay also had something to do with it.
Indira Gandhi, 3 days after the Indo-Soviet treaty is signed, on the 9th of August 1971, Indira Gandhi sends him a slip of paper saying, why not a similar treaty with China?
And he said that you're almost out of your mind.
He said, you're out of your mind. You can't offer the same treaty to all the countries in the world. People will laugh at you. I mean, this is how he would respond.
But what we saw during the emergency, that was really the most complicated and probably the most tragic time in the relationship.
It is inexplicable to me.
Sanjay Gandhi orchestrated raids on his family.
Pandit
even got his wife arrested.
Yeah, Pandit Brothers, company in which his wife had an equity stake, a company in which his uncle owned, brother-in-law had an equity stake. Pandit Brothers was raided. His uncle and brother-in-law were arrested. His wife was about to be arrested and she was not. His house in Shantiniketan was raided twice. So between the 15th of July 1975 and the 15th of August 1975, 1 month period, he is subject to extraordinary harassment. And that harassment, orders would have come from Mr. Gandhi, no doubt, Sanjay Gandhi. But he kept quiet. He didn't intervene. He differentiated the personal from the professional.
He attended all the cabinet meetings?
He attended all the cabinet meetings in his capacity
while
as
the
Deputy Chairman of the Planning Commission, while the arrests were taking place. And, you know, he continued sending her notes, the 20-point program, you know, various notes on various issues, on agriculture, you know, public investment, strengthening the public sector and so on. So, you know, it was business as usual as far as Haksar, the public personality, was concerned, but it was certainly not business as usual as P.N. Haksar, the private man, private individual was concerned.
Do you feel that Indira Gandhi should have given heed or paid heed to P.N. Haksar's advice on the emergency? Would history have seen her differently? Would we have seen Indira Gandhi differently?
Personally speaking, I think you know, we can understand the context of the emergency. We can analyze the historical factors that led to the emergency, like Mr. Haksar does, in which I have quoted. But there is no denying the fact that the emergency was a colossal error of judgment and decision. And on the part of the Prime Minister and her key advisors, Siddhartha Shankar Ray and Sanjay Gandhi and so on. Yes, I think the emergency has detracted from the magnificence of Indira Gandhi's achievements in so many fields. Green Revolution, Space Revolution, Pokhran 1, you know, strengthening of the public sector, making India self-reliant. These are legacies which have endured. Unfortunately, the emergency also dominates the discourse.
Let's also talk about now the impact of P.N. Haksar on the Congress today, and what could be the possible things that the Congress party today could learn from what P.N. Haksar did way back in the 1960s and the 70s.
The most important thing is those in power must have somebody who can speak truth to power. I mean, he was brutally honest. He was not a sycophant. You know, the power of ideas was the one that was the power that really gave him the adrenaline. And I think that's the most important lesson that we learn from him.
You're in the communication strategy group. If you had to give one piece of advice to the Congress president right now, simply because you've gone through all these archives about P.N. Haksar and Indira Gandhi and their relationship and all that happened during that period, what would that one piece of advice be?
Well, you know, I'm sure that the Congress president knows about Mr. Haksar and Mr. Haksar's contributions. I think Mr. Gandhi recognizes this, and you know, I think Mr. Gandhi, the private Mr. Gandhi, is when you interact with him, he's extraordinarily open to ideas. He discusses, he debates, he gets alternative points of view. If you're silent, he asks you, he provokes you to give your views. I think Mr. Gandhi is comfortable with the power of ideas, and he wants a diversity of opinion. He is not in the Narendra Modi mold. I mean, I think they are completely different personalities. You know? He's not a person who's going to impose his point of view. He's not about to call all of us and say, look, I've decided to demonetize, and demonetization we have to do. I don't think Mr. Gandhi will behave like that. He's much more consensual. He's much more getting people to participate in the decision-making process.
Okay, and my final question now, sir. The mantra for 2019. We've got the general elections coming up in a few months from now. The Congress is on its lowest number in Parliament. They suffered one of their worst defeats in 2014. What is the mantra if they have to succeed?
It's not a question of if we have to succeed. We will succeed. And in 2019, we will burst the Modi balloon. We burst the India shining balloon in 2004 when no one expected us to do. We will burst it in 2019, if not earlier. And the next government will be a government in which the Congress will play a pivotal role.
We're talking about the third front and a coalition.
I choose my words very carefully.
Yeah.
The next government will be a government in which the Congress will play a pivotal role.
Should Rahul Gandhi be ready to step aside if the India government has to be defeated?
This is not about personality A or personality B. This is a defeat of ideologies. This is a contest between alternative visions of the past, alternative visions of the future. I think the next government will be a government of like-minded parties in which the Congress will play a decisive influential and pivotal role.
But should they insist on the post of the Prime Minister?
Right now, what I am saying is that's not the issue right now. The issue now is to get parties together. Parties are already together in opposition to Mr. Modi. Parties have also to come together with a positive agenda, with a positive, constructive narrative. And I think that's the more important challenge than to worry about who's going to be the Prime Minister.
Right. Thank you very much for speaking to us, Mr. Jairam Ramesh.
Thank you.
That was Mr. Jairam Ramesh speaking to us about his book, Intertwined Lives, and the important relationship between P.N. Haksar and Indira Gandhi, and what the Congress party and politicians today can learn from P.N. Haksar. Thank you for watching.